bought a camping backpack from an estate sale and found these pages inside. Posted by the Whistlers. There was a bundle of papers wadded in a deep pocket of the backpack, but I didn't notice until after I got it home. I went back to the house where the estate sale was held, and a young woman answered the door. She couldn't say who the backpack belonged to and had no interest in the papers. Her grandmother was the one who died, of old age, natural causes. Apparently she was a bit of a hoarder, so I don't know if I'll ever be able to track down the source. The handwriting is tiny, and the pages are damaged. I'll transcribe as faithfully as I can. September 5th. The man on the trail is dead and will need to be moved. It is a more difficult task than I would have guessed, and nearly impossible for a 5 feet 4 inches woman with no help and no gurney. I tried to drag him toward camp right after I found him this morning, but only succeeded in pivoting him and twisting his legs around each other horribly. Bodies look so wrong once they stop feeling pain. I never thought I would have so much experience with death, but I haven't cried over the loss of someone since the lighthouse. This man shit his pants before he died, and moving him made the smell worse. It will bring the animals in. Still no sign of Ira or Bill. September 6th. I used Ira's foam sleeping mat like a sled to move the dead man. It still took me an hour to drag him 30 yards, and now the mat is so torn up that I'm questioning whether it was worth the effort. Gary Law. His driver's license is in his wallet. He's from Utah. I took the sight of him as a good sign at first. Another human on the trail might have meant we were close to civilization, but now I'm not sure what he was doing out here, or what it means. I can't tell what killed him. No claw marks, no wounds on his hands. He's stoutly built, but with a bagginess about his physique that makes me think he was starving. He died with his mouth open, every mucous membrane turned ash gray. I don't think he was attacked. It's a relief. If he had been missing pieces, the logical thing to do would have been to move camp, but then Ira and Bill would have come back to nothing. I'm more afraid of being separated from them than I am of anything else. Still waiting on them both. September 8th. I spent all day yesterday stripping and burying Gary Law. He was shorter in stature, but his clothes should fit Bill well enough. His feet were small, so I'm keeping the socks for myself. They're almost brand new, thick blue wool. I can tell he wasn't an outdoorsman. Everything else was new too, new shoelaces, new cross trainers, new windbreaker, none of it quite right for someone trekking this far out. And the pants are from Banana Republic, pleated, and with a neat sheen. These aren't pristine like everything else, and were hemmed by a tailor. I washed them in the creek, but they still smell like shit and death. Everything does, actually, to the point that I think the smell might be on me, in me. I weighted the pants down on a stone near the ridge that gets full sun. I miss bleach. I put green boughs on the signifier today, but there was no answering smoke. I'm more worried about Ira than I am about Bill. It was Bill who found this trail to begin with. He always finds his way. September 9th. Bill came back today. He took his time coming through the trees, and I got so scared I almost fired the gun. But he clapped, and I clapped back, and he called out to say he was injured. It was the loose shale on the hill between camp and the cave where Lillian was killed. He got caught in a slide and wound up buried to his hips, and 1 foot wedged between boulders. He couldn't get free until the rocks shifted again, which they did, that night, when a whistler came by. He's sure it didn't see him. He had to spend 2 days convalescing within sight of Lillian's cave before he was well enough to hike back. 2 nights alone out there. I boiled water while I listened to his story, and gave Bill some aspirin from the dead man's backpack. His foot needed to be wrapped, but I don't think it's broken. We should stop splitting up, I said. He nodded and pushed his pack toward me. There was salmon and berries and some mushrooms I didn't really trust. We should think about hiking out, he said. Pick a direction and go. It's been 4 weeks. We'll only get weaker. When Ira comes back. I agreed, but Bill pursed his lips like there was something he couldn't say. What? But he only shook his head. It's been 10 days now since Ira left. September 11th. I woke up this morning to a sound I thought was a whistler, but it was actually Bill, on his knees, crying at Gary Law's grave. I yelled at him about it, about waking me up and making so much noise. He looked hurt, and I felt bad. I'm just worried about Ira, I think, and afraid. I don't know what we'll do when the weather starts getting colder. If we wait too much longer, hiking out won't be an option. There hasn't been any sign of rescue, no planes or helicopters, no smoke. No sounds but wolf howls and the distant whistling, like elk mating calls, almost. If Ira were here, he'd tell us a story to get our minds off things. He's a registered nurse. He doesn't panic. September 12th. I apologized to Bill last night. He shook his head like it was nothing, so I put my hands on his shoulders and apologized again, because I needed him to really hear it. Well, I'm sorry you were alone, he said. We should never have left you alone. He was looking into my eyes so sadly, and I imagined he was remembering all of the awful things of the past weeks, and feeling the same guilt I felt. It was our research that brought everyone here, our recklessness and curiosity to blame. Then he kissed me, and kept kissing me, and finally I kissed him back, because I was feeling something for once. Not even lust, really. More like homesickness. A little breakthrough of pain and wonder after all the bitterness and hardening and cold. We undressed each other, and had sex in the tent. I don't know why. I've never cheated on Ira before. Never even thought about it. This didn't seem wrong in the moment, but now it's difficult to write down. It just felt like something we both needed. We didn't say anything at all. Afterward he went outside to sleep by the fire, like he couldn't stand to be so close. He spent this morning hauling water and wood, barely pausing to acknowledge me. I don't think it will happen again. I don't think either of us will tell Ira. September 15th. It's late. We hear whistlers, just north of us, a chorus of them. Bill says he hears 8 distinct tones, but I don't know. It could be dozens. We put the fires out, and now we're crouched in the tent with the knives and the gun. Bill reaches for me, puts himself between me and the sound when it crescendos. I don't think he knows why he does it. I don't think it would make a difference. We won't sleep tonight. September 21st. Ira is back. His coat is in tatters, and his hat is gone. He isn't speaking. I would call it shock, but he's the only one with medical training, and I don't really know what to make of him. He walks and moves fine. He doesn't look at me. Doesn't seem to see me. I feel so guilty. I'm the reason he's out here. Now every time I look up I find Bill staring at me. He tries to communicate with looks, but all I ever make out is the fear and shame. Ira won't eat. We zipped him into the dead man's jacket and left him to sleep, but he's been shaking and mumbling all afternoon. He seems exhausted, but he hardly closes his eyes. It's my fault. September 26th. Ira hasn't improved much, although he is sleeping now, and eating some. I've only seen him sick once before, food poisoning on our honeymoon. He was so stoic about it, and didn't want my help. Now he hasn't got much choice. I walked about a mile north and shot a porcupine, and Bill is setting up an alder smoker so we can save the meat. He's getting serious about us hiking out, but I'm not sure how we'll manage it with Ira so sick. He made it back here, didn't he? Bill said. He'll snap out of it. Maybe so. Neither of us has speculated about what Ira saw. All we know is he was on the south side of the mountain. Bill has proposed we go west as far as the river, then follow it south. If he's right about where he thinks we are, we'll hit Red Hill before it starts to snow. There's a lodge there, and a few permanent residents, or so the helicopter pilot said. If anyone is looking for us, they've certainly asked around in Red Hill. I'm glad we have meat now. I've been feeling weak. September 30th. Ira is recovering, and not a moment too soon. I woke this morning with his arms around me, and the look in his eyes said he knew where he was, who I was, and was bursting with something he wanted to say but couldn't. It's okay, I told him. Be patient with yourself. We had a cold snap last night that left frost on the ground. All three of us cuddled together to sleep, Ira between Bill and I, and at one point Bill reached over to grab my shoulder. I think we're done with the awkwardness. I think we both know we were just scared. We don't have anywhere near enough food for the journey, but we're leaving tomorrow anyway. Bill has a cold. Edited for spacing. I'll keep going through the papers and let you know what I find, of what I've done. Like she's angry. I can't explain it. It's as if I can hear her. Whispers of disappointment rising along with my own pulse. I'm certain now that she never meant her words to be used this way, to be posted online with so little context, offered up as entertainment. I didn't sleep well last night. Still, I feel like we've started something now that needs to be finished. A few of you expressed interest in seeing Ruth's original pages, but I think that's where I should draw the line. It's where I can redeem myself. I'm uncomfortable with the idea of photographing the original documents, her original words, and turning them into just another memento mori for the internet to have its way with. At this point, it makes no difference to me if you believe me or not. I guess that might seem selfish, but you can't hear her like I can. Anyway, here's the rest of what I've transcribed so far. October 3rd. Third day of walking. I wish I could talk to Lillian about what happened with Bill. She was young, ambitious, and so funny. Plus, she had a whole hoard of birth control pills. She and Jeff were dating. I forget how many you take in emergencies, and how soon after it has to be. But the pills are in her pack, and her pack is in the cave with the whistlers and whatever is left of her. She had the maps. She had everything that mattered. The cave is miles behind us now. We built a big cairn by the stream. At some point, we'll have to lead rangers out here, I'm sure. They'll want to collect Lillian, and Jeff, and the helicopter pilot. I can't remember his name. I hope one of us makes it out so his family can hear that it wasn't his fault. He had 3 daughters, and was expecting a 4th. I can't imagine what his wife is doing now. If anyone finds this, it was an electrical malfunction. He got us to the ground safe and sound. He was perfect, even fixed the problem, but then the weather closed in, and we couldn't take off. Lillian knew the way, so we hiked to the lighthouse. And then the whistlers came. October 10th. It has rained for 2 days. The dead man's jacket is nowhere near warm enough for Ira, and too big, but we don't have anything else. At least it's waterproof. We hear whistlers every night now, just after sunset. 3 or 4 of them, calling back and forth. Bill is convinced they're tracking us. We stack rocks high around the fire. We're following a new game trail now, instead of the river. The walking is easier. I didn't think twice about it until last night. Bill leaned forward on his elbows at the fireside while the whistlers seemed to be circling us. "What if this isn't a game trail?" he said, his voice a low murmur. "What if they made this?" I don't have the energy to think about that. It's simple. If we're walking a trail they made, if their nightly whooping is urging us into a trap, we're fucked. Ira curls up in a ball when the whistlers start calling. He rides like someone is sticking him with pins. All he's said so far is, "Let's go." October 14th. It hailed today, hard. We had to take shelter under a tree, and when dark fell there were no whistles for the first time in a week. The silence was somehow more eerie than the threat of the whistlers. Ira felt it too, because about 15 minutes after dark he stood up and started whooping and whistling out into the rain, calling and screaming in a tone that didn't sound like him. Bill yelled at him to be quiet, but he acted as if possessed, calling out to them at the top of his lungs with his eyes rolling back in his head. Bill tackled him to the ground and beat him to shut him up. "Stop it!" I said at first, but when Ira didn't stop making noise, Bill looked at me, and I closed my eyes and nodded. He had to knock Ira cold to get him to be quiet, and he was sobbing while he did it, pleading with Ira to settle down. The wind was sharp, and I think it saved us. Every tree was vibrating and creaking and howling. The whistlers had likely all retreated to their caves. Maybe they hibernate. Maybe they'll leave us alone soon. October 17th. Ira was his old self this morning, as completely as if we had gone backward in time. He was up before either of us, heating water. He said he took so long to reach on the south side of the mountain because the whistlers caught him in a trap. It was a hole clearly dug with tools. He was shaking while he spoke. They only came at night, and I didn't get a good look at them. I could hear them and see silhouettes, but nothing definite. It was too dark. I don't know what they wanted with me. I got out. I climbed out. And I ran. We're well away from there now, finally reaching the end of the ridges and the start of a valley where everything is very green. I hope the change in biome means a decrease in the whistler population. Part of me wants to take steps to document as much, if it's true, but all of our field notes were lost with Lillian's gear, plus the night vision goggles and the cameras. My biggest fear is that we'll all be killed, and our disappearance will inspire some other young researchers to come up here to solve the mystery for themselves. We'll become just another line in the sick folklore that draws people to this cursed place. I would hate to be part of that cycle, knowing what I know now. The whistlers are very real, and they don't want us here. November 1st. I dreamed last night that I was pregnant with Gary Law's baby. Nothing else happened in the dream. I was hiking endlessly with Ira and Bill, and all three of us knew that I had been with the dead man, and it bothered us, but we wouldn't talk about it. I woke up with my period, thank God. I've never been so happy doing laundry. We've made camp by a small lake in the low point of the valley. It's uphill from here to a distant saddle Ira thinks he remembers seeing from the air. It's only about 2 miles away. Red Hill should be just beyond that, Ira says, but we don't have the energy to push that far yet. We'll rest today, and tomorrow we'll move, and hopefully we'll be drinking beer at the Red Hill Lodge before dark. Ira is the best shot, so he took the gun to look for rock ptarmigan. We lit 2 fires and agreed he's not to go beyond shouting distance, but I still worry. The whistlers don't seem willing to attack when we're in a group. Lillian and Jeff were both alone when they were killed. Besides, I'm not convinced Ira is fully recovered yet. He says nonsensical things in his sleep, cries out and scratches. That's new. Bill and I went fishing after the laundry was done. It was stupid, doing it in that order. All we caught were minnows, and even that took hours. He was staring at me while we sat. The cold was seeping into my bones, making me irritable. I haven't been warm in weeks. What? I said. He's not himself. You know it. He meant Ira. He's better than he was. He's okay. We'll find him a doctor in Red Hill. What if Red Hill isn't on the other side of that saddle? What if we get up there and we're facing another week's worth of empty forest? What then? I realized my eyes were closed. I opened them, and the lake seemed oddly bright. Bill's fingers were pressed against his brow. We'll worry about that when we have to, I said. I'm saying I don't trust him like this, Ruth. He doesn't remember the other night, after the hail. He can't control himself. He flexed his hands. He could get us killed. He's my husband. He's my brother. I nodded, but that was all I could do. I have known Bill longer than I have known Ira, and spend more time with him most days back at home, since we work in the same department. He introduced me to Ira at a Christmas party. 6 years ago, now. What should we do? I asked. I don't know. But I think we may need to be open to the idea of cutting the rope at some point. If he gets any worse, it may come to that. Bill started rock climbing on the weekends in college. Cutting the rope. It's a metaphor for letting Ira die so we can live. November 2nd. Yesterday, while Ira was still out hunting, we heard 3 shots in the woods. Too many to take down a rock ptarmigan, and Bill and I stood, staring, tense, for just a moment before we hurried to put out the fires and pack what we could into our bags. Ira came running into camp, breathing so hard he couldn't say what was wrong. He had no gun and no bag, and he grabbed my arm as soon as he was close enough and pulled me through the grass, up the valley, toward the saddle. Bill looked alarmed. He caught up to us and pried us apart. He yelled at Ira and handed me my haphazardly stuffed pack. All our clothes were still wet, torn from the line, and Ira's eyes were wild. He stared off behind us, toward the woods he'd run from. "It's a warning," he said. "I understand it now. It's a warning." Bill tried to talk him down, but then we heard the whistler's eerily musical voices. I've never heard it during daylight, and never so close as this. I followed Ira's gaze into the trees, and stared, and listened. I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't even draw breath. I held onto my pack straps with a stony grip, like it was attached to a balloon that might whisk me out of harm's way any moment. Ira took my arm again, and now Bill was helping him, pushing me along the trail until I could run, until we all were running as fast as we could. The trail led straight into the open, and we all reacted differently, ducking through alders or sweeping wide from the trail to be closer to the cover of the hemlock. Ira took the shortest path, straight through the matted grass of the game trail, and soon he was far ahead of me, and it was all I could do to keep my eyes on him and my legs moving as fast as they would go. He was the first to reach the hill covered in scrub, the saddle between 2 jagged peaks. He ducked low as he ran, and I lost sight of him. Bill's bad foot and pack slowed him down, and I saw him stop and crouch, wide-eyed, beneath the trees, after we'd been fleeing for 10 minutes that felt like fleeting seconds. Ira's vanishing sent panic straight to my toes. It took me no time to decide not to wait with Bill. I had to catch Ira. I kept running until I reached the ridge, my lungs burning, but once I arrived there was no sign of him, no trail to follow. I lumbered to the crest of the saddle, clapping frantically, looking back over my shoulder for Bill, who was also gone. From so high up I could see the forest beyond, and the river, and a flat brown bay at low tide. No town. No red hill. I clapped, but neither of them clapped back. I was so exposed, but the whistling was distant now, and in fact I couldn't pick it apart from the wind with any certainty. I walked closer to the trees, and built 2 fires with my fire steel and shaking hands, the second in the open of the hilltop, big and smoky. The hemlock makes for thick cover. There was plenty of dry tinder. We left the tent behind, and the sleeping pads. Bill had the stove and the cooking pots. Ira had the gun. I have the hatchet, the fire steel, the wet laundry. I made a lean-to with a small roof of boughs, and sat through the evening with my back tense against a thick tree, and waited, and slept fitfully. I did the same today, and kept the fires alive, and now it's getting dark. I should walk back down into the valley to collect the tent, but the sound of the daytime whistle is stuck in me like a splinter. I can't face the creature that made that sound, even after years of looking for it. I never believed the stories, not really. We came here to research the folklore. To listen to elderly trappers and hunters tell the outlandish stories they grew up with, to record them for posterity. We should never have come here. No sign of Ira or Bill. November 3rd. The rain came through my pine shelter last night, but at least I can say it broke me out of my trance. I tightened the hip belt on my pack, added a few hours of wood to both fires, unsheathed my knife and taped it to my hand. Bill told me to do this, a long time ago, if I knew I might have to run and fight at the same time. I'm walking back north, toward the place where I saw him fall. Toward the place where the whistlers surprised us. Whistlers aren't the only things to worry about in these woods. There are bears, wolves, coyotes, fearless predators that encircle our warm camp at night. Conventional wisdom is to make noise when passing through denser growth. Avoid surprising a carnivore. Yet I have long suspected that noise lures the whistlers. Prey species don't announce themselves. They pass in stealth. After what happened to Lillian and Jeff and recently Ira, I have no doubt that we are prey. I resolved to go quietly along the margin of the hemlock. Keeping the game trail to my right, the signal fires smoke squarely at my back. I walked carefully, keeping low, whispering for Bill whenever the wind slowed, pausing sometimes to listen hard. After nearly an hour of creeping and murmuring fruitlessly through the trees, I lost my caution. "God damn it, Bill!" I shrieked, and seconds later his clap came, 2 shocks of sound. I clapped back, and he did too, and then I found him, damp and chilled to the bone, slumped against the base of a tall spruce tree not 30 feet from where I'd yelled. The needles where he sat were soft and dry, and I sat down right beside him, overcome. I tore the tape off my hand and held his face in my palms. His eyes were alert, despite everything. "Where are you hurt?" He lifted his ankle. It was still wrapped, but swollen now, risen like bread dough. It must have been fractured all along, and our sprint across the valley was the final straw. He was quiet, but grimaced as I wrestled off his sock and the inadequate wrappings. I held his foot against my thigh, feeling the mess of swollen tissue. There was deep blue bruising all across the top of his foot. He took my hands before I could do anything more. "Where is Ira? I smelled the smoke from your camp." I shook my head. I couldn't catch him. He didn't have a pack to weigh him down, and he's such a fast runner to begin with. He was over the ridge before me, and once I got up there he was gone. If he saw my smoke, he hasn't let on. "He left you?" He had no gear. I focused on the foot, knowing I would need something tight and sturdy to wrap it in if I had any hope of moving Bill up to my camp. I took the dead man's blue wool socks from my feet. They were small for Bill, and worked like a compression bandage. I rolled both of them onto the one foot, and there were tears coming down his face before I was done. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "But you're lucky. I don't think it's broken all the way through. Just badly fractured. Ira would know." He stared at me after I said this, but I avoided his gaze. I cast about until I found a dry branch straight enough to make into a crutch. Bill is just over 6 feet tall, so it was awkward walking a mile uphill with half his body weight on my shoulder. I could see he was in tremendous pain, but we made the trek without stopping, and it wasn't until he had collapsed beneath my pine shelter that I paused to let myself wonder if I had pushed him too hard. It didn't matter now, I reasoned. We were as safe as we could hope to be. I fed him the last of the dead man's aspirin and elevated his foot. There is nothing else, no food, and nothing to catch food with. I'll worry about that tomorrow. Tonight, it's all I can do to keep the roof intact and the fires burning. Ira will see the smoke and come to us before Bill is ready to walk again. He will. He has to. November 6th. The swelling has gone down on Bill's ankle. I killed a bird, a grouse, by throwing rocks. That seems like a new low. Rock throwing is part of a deeper tier of human desperation we should never have had to access. While sitting immobile, Bill has made a bow. He'll use the bird's feathers for arrow fletching, and maybe for fishing flies. He saved the longest tail feather out for me. To use as a quill, he said, in case my pen dies. We need to scout the area before we move again. I could hike to the top of one of the peaks, but I can't justify leaving Bill alone that long. Not that he's helpless, but the awful truth is we're both down to the last of our endurance. If we get separated, if I wind up alone again, I don't think I'll have it in me to keep going. It's bothering Bill, not knowing what happened to Ira. The whistlers were behind us. He was ahead. He keeps saying, "If they were hunting, they would have caught me." So, they weren't hunting. What did they want? Why didn't he stop? At night, we hear them in nearly every direction, but they keep their distance. They aren't circling closer like they usually do. It's as if they want us to know we're within their boundaries, trapped within their home turf. If we sleep in shifts. November 10th. No news. The weather is dry, but much colder than last week. Winter is late, and I worry that when the snow finally comes it will fall all at once, burying us and any points of reference. I built a windbreak and improved our shelter. Caught a rabbit. Helped Bill bathe. I keep catching him putting weight on his foot, rushing things. No sign of Ira, and not much sleep. November 12th. It snowed overnight at last. Just as I predicted, it came in a big rush, a great dumping of powder, and then a sunny morning. The signal fire on the hill was smothered, but Bill wouldn't let me go out and relight it. He would have seen it by now, he said, meaning Ira. Save the dry wood. He made a second crutch and uses both to humor me, but he says he can't be idle anymore. It seems such a risk, I said, to move on in this weather with you hurt. If we stay here, we will die, he replied. He's talking about building a sled once the snow is thick enough. I can't listen. I'll take the bow to the top of the hill. Scout our path. Look for game. November 13th. Nothing much to see from the high ridge yesterday. No snow has fallen yet around the bay, and it occurred to me that we might just follow the coastline south. We could set a new fire every day on the beach, leave it smoking. Maybe a plane will pass. Maybe Ira will see us. From wherever he's hiding. Maybe the whistlers don't swim. Bill says we'll leave tomorrow. What about Ira? I said. He shrugged, looking exhausted. Don't know which way he went. Don't know where to look. Don't know how he is. If we leave, we will never see him again. I started to cry, and Bill walked away to the shelter and curled up like he was going to sleep. He turned his back to me. I looked out across the saddle and the valley and tried to keep my tears quiet. It was just dusk. No distant fires. No smoke. If he's nearby, he is cold. He is dying, and I'm helpless. It's full dark now, and for the first time in weeks the whistlers haven't made a sound. November 14th. Bill woke me up at dawn. He had hot water and a scrap of rabbit for me. I'm saving the bones and feet in a plastic bag. I don't know if they'll be any good for soup, but soon they may be all we have. He lifted my pack for me to put on, then put his hands on my shoulders. I'm sorry, he said. I don't know what else to do. I looked back at him, watched while he got into his own pack and kicked snow and dirt over the fire's embers. I thought of leaving a note for Ira to follow, or some kind of sign, but the snow is falling again in pellets. Every trace of us will be obliterated soon. November 18th. The hiking has been easier since we got below the snow line, but the weather is following us. The coast is icing over. We're making good time, and I think we're both relieved to be off the game trail. Aside from mud and rough gravel, the terrain is much easier here along the beaches than it was up in the trees. It's been 5 nights now since we heard the whistlers. Maybe they don't like the cold, or maybe we've finally left their natural range. Even the smallest hope is agony. We had some luck with fishing yesterday. An enormous trout was stuck in a low pond after the tide went out. Probably sick. Probably already dying. We spent the whole day gorging on it, and cutting strips to smoke. I found Ira's gold watch in my pack. I gave it to him for our 2nd anniversary. He had a habit of taking it off whenever he worked with his hands, and must have stashed it in my bag to keep it safe. I asked Bill if he wanted to wear it, but he said no. There's no point looking at the time, I guess. I buried it near the fire, built a cairn over top, said some words, like a funeral. Bill didn't say anything. I had to. I had to do something in order to keep moving. I don't feel certain Ira is dead, but I can't fathom what it means if he's out there and we're leaving him behind. The most horrible thought is that he's the reason the whistlers are gone. Maybe he's leading them on a chase away from us, or maybe they were hunting, and they caught him, and their hunger is satisfied for now. Don't think like that, Bill says, but I know Ira is in his thoughts too. Bill is a folklorist like me, but that's not what drew him here. He wanted to see the whistlers with his own eyes, like Lillian did. He wanted to document them, their habits. Describe them as a species for science. Everything that's happened so far fits the stories, I said. Don't, Ruth. But I don't stop, because he knows the stories even better than I do. He knows we're just like all the other characters now. Hunted. Doomed. They pick groups apart. They separate people. They take their prey one at a time. You don't believe the stories. You never believed them. I opened my mouth, but the words were delayed. I believe we'll never see Ira again. We sleep a little bit apart despite the bitter cold. He's always up before I wake. Bill says he recognizes this coastline, and there's a pinnacle to the east he calls Fanphone Point. I'd say we're 8 days north of Red Hill, if we stick to the coast. I'm not getting my hopes up. November 28th. 10 days since I wrote. It all blends together. This bit of shoreline looks just the same as what we saw days ago, the water just as flat and gray. If it weren't for Bill and the compass, I would assume we were skirting a large lake, not an inlet of the Pacific Ocean. I would assume we were going in circles. We do have Fanphone Point to navigate by, and the stars. The weather has cleared. Winter is hesitating again. I worry I'll never see leaves on trees again, or flowers opening up in a field of grass. I worked all the time. Ira and I didn't take a vacation last summer. I squandered so much. Some days, Bill and I don't speak a word to each other. We stop walking. He assembles the shelter, I build the fire. He unpacks the food, I hang our damp clothes. We eat. We sleep. And in the morning we walk. December 1st. I saw Red Hill first. Our strip of shoreline was getting rocky, so we went up into a stand of cedar and found a steep bare trail. We haven't heard whistlers in weeks, so we beat pots and shouted every few steps, and something about us using our voices made us giddy. Bill started singing a camp song I'd never heard. Something from when he was a child, I guessed, full of rhymed bodily functions. He laughed while he sang it, laughed until tears rolled down his face. He had to stop to catch his breath, and I walked a short ways onward, because it seemed he needed a moment alone. It seemed he was finally realizing what I realized when we left our camp near the saddle, that we had abandoned Ira to an unknown fate. That he might have died a preventable death because we were too scared and broken to search for him. I walked toward a break in the trees with Bill hyperventilating at my back, and saw a straight line far away, and a clearing where lighter green grass vibrated amongst dark evergreen. We were on a bit of a ridge, and could look down into the distant orderliness of a minuscule town, just a lump of weedy brush and granite rising out of marshy lowlands. Now I was crying. There was a water tower, a long split rail fence. Distantly, some low buildings and power lines were visible against a curtain of trees. I called to Bill, who ran up beside me and stopped and stared. He wrapped his arms around me in his relief, squeezing me hard against his chest. I kissed him without thinking first, and he jerked his head away, exhaling shakily into my hair, but not releasing me from his arms. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't know how to," he began, but didn't finish. I eased myself out of his embrace and gestured for him to follow me down the hill. It started snowing. Darkness fell when we were still about a mile outside of Red Hill. The terrain was difficult, thorny, and muddy. I struggled with my dimming flashlight, focusing intently on my feet and the ground ahead, but Bill grabbed my arm as the moon was rising. He stopped me. "Look," he said. I looked ahead to Red Hill. I could see the water tower clearly still, an armored dome high above everything. It was silhouetted against the sky. What? There are no lights. I blinked, searched, but of course he was right. As night fell, nothing had come to life in Red Hill. There were no porch lamps, no glowing windows, no blinking red beacon atop the water tower. The place looked abandoned, as still and dark as death. We can't stop here in the open, I said. Can you make it without your light on? My flashlight was nearly dead, and the moon was rising anyway. I switched it off, and we continued, not struggling as urgently as before. I was aware of the sound my boots made in the soggy ground. Bill's voice dropped to a whisper, was thick with caution. We'll knock on the first door we come to, he said. We'll lead with the fact that our chopper went down. What do you think is wrong? What are you afraid of? I was terrified, but I wasn't sure why. I don't know, he said. The moon was directly overhead by the time we reached the split rail fence we'd seen from the ridge. Caution and fatigue had made that final stretch of our journey seem endless. There were sounds in the woods nearby, not whistlers, maybe wolves, but I was more concerned about people. Lillian had warned us about the residents this far out, in these isolated stretches of forest. The lighthouse keeper had held a rifle to her forehead once when she surprised him after a few weeks away. We passed through the split rail fence, and walked across a flat expanse of dirt stuck with poles, tetherball poles. It was a schoolyard. There were no children to be seen, no people, no signs of life. I turned my light back on, and Bill did the same. He had a headlamp, brighter and whiter than my little incandescent torch, and walked ahead of me through the yard, up toward a chain swing set and a few low buildings that looked like houses. The street between them was hard dirt scattered with rough quartz gravel that glittered in the light. He was bold. He walked up the low porch of the first house we leveled with, and rapped sharply on the front door. Anyone home? He called. Our helicopter went down. We need help. All was silent. I looked around while he stared at the door, hoping the noise might draw movement elsewhere in Red Hill. No luck. We went house to house, knocking and calling at 8 buildings on that lonely street. We ended at the lodge, a sort of multi-purpose building that contained rooms for rent, a post office, and a meeting hall. It was deserted like the rest. My flashlight flickered and died while we stood on the front porch. Bill tested the handle and found the lodge unlocked. I can't see how anyone would object, he said, tipping his headlamp beam downward and looking at my face. We were both shivering. The pilot said people lived here year-round. He must have been mistaken. Inside, Bill felt along the lodge's wall for a light switch, but there was no power. I found a full kerosene lamp on a bookshelf, and a book of matches in an ashtray on a table in the lodge's dining area. I lit the lamp and breathed a little easier. Bill walked around the lodge's rooms with his headlamp, getting his bearings, but I sat at a table with the lamp, holding my head and trying to feel grateful for the shelter. He came back, wiping his hands on his pants. The breaker didn't do anything. There's a generator back in the utility room, looks like it's got a little fuel left, but I'll wait until morning to try it. When I didn't respond, he came to sit across from me at the table. Abandoned or not, we're going to have to winter here. I nodded. We'll get our hands on a radio, as much food and fuel as we can find. We'll hole up and wait it out. Someone will come for us. I nodded again, but couldn't look at him. All you need is rest, he said softer now. He led me toward the bedrooms and opened a creaking door for me. The room had a double bed with a pretty cream-colored quilt, a closet with accordion doors, and a wide window that looked out on blackness. Is there a room without a window? He looked at my reflection in the dark glass, then looked at the real me. I carried the kerosene lamp, and my unsteady grip cast eerie shadows. Course, he said. He ushered me into the room directly across the hall. It was adjacent to a doorway that led away toward a lounge full of deer trophies and enormous television screens. It had skylights, and the moon was showing through. The bedroom was nearly identical to the first, except the bedspread was blue patchwork and the window was replaced with a hanging tapestry of sweet pea blossoms. I nodded, set my backpack down, and placed the lamp on top of the dresser so it cast light on each of the 4 walls. I unzipped my jacket, but Bill stayed in the doorway. I could take the room across the way. Don't be silly. He gave me a serious look, but put his pack down beside mine and came to get in bed with me. Suppose it's too cold to sleep apart, he said, taking off his boots and settling rigidly under the covers. Why is it different from sharing a tent? It just is. I thought I would fall away into the deepest sleep of my life, but the wind picked up, and the lodge creaked and shuddered around us, and I thought every other sound was a footstep or a human whimper. At one point I woke Bill up, dead certain I'd heard a baby crying. He stroked my hair and listened for a full minute, then pressed me against the mattress by my shoulder before lying back down himself. Back to sleep, he mumbled. But I didn't sleep. Instead, I took the kerosene lamp to the chair in the corner and wrote down this strange day. Bill is motionless in sleep, one arm slung beside him in the place I left. It is different, just the 2 of us sharing a domestic space. What will become of us during months of isolation? What will we look like to whoever finds us? I hear it again now, a wailing that is certainly not the wind. The doors are locked, but that's hardly any consolation. If the whistlers are real, what else could be living in this place? A banshee? Wendigo? Or something even stranger? Bill sleeps through the sound. He won't believe me in the morning.